Well, hello everybody, it's Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another Critique of the Week. Thanks so much for joining me on this Groundhog Day. Katie Doder says, will Tim see his shadow today? I don't know, maybe my 1 o'clock shadow. That's about it. But hoping for an early spring. It is a cold, I got my hoodie on right now. It is cold in the office, it is snowy outside. It's going to be snowy. It was snowing, it was going to snow up here in the mountains of Southern California, but it is warm everywhere we are on the Critique of the Week, so thanks for joining me. We might not get anybody on Facebook. Facebook, for some reason, thinks, even though they don't list the time zone anywhere when you're filling out these event pages, it just says the time. It apparently thinks I'm still in Texas, in Central Time, because it listed the show as 2 hours earlier, and then the event's already over, so I had to make a new event, and I don't know if anyone's going to see it. But we do have one viewer, and Jenny Middleton found it anyway. Hey, Jenny. So Jenny's there. And we'll see if we get anybody else. But I'll keep an eye on Jenny. I won't miss that out. Okay, and let's see over on YouTube, though. We've got a good crew. We've got James Langford's here. Let's see. Gary Rosson, D. Coleman, Winston Munn. Monica Dobos is here. Brian O'Sullivan is here. Rose, that's probably Rose Lennard, who we're going to be looking at in a bit. Dick Westheimer from vacation, back from hiking in the beautiful Arc of Appalachia Preserve. Really cool. Cindy Guntherman is here. Mark Grinier, Sharon Ferrante, Clayton Clark, Katie Dozier, we already saw. Mary Keating. Who else we got? Jerry Stephenson's here. Sharon Ferrante, Tom Barlow, Phyllis Sherritt, Paul Mitchell Bernstein, another poet, Dolly, it's here, MD, Lisa Seidenberg. So we got a great group, and we're going to have a great critique. Now, we're going to do a traditional critique, which we haven't been doing as much lately, where we just look at actually two poems. And I pulled up poems that looked pretty good from poems who submitted recently. So these are hot off the press, and Rose Lennard is the first one up. And as always, I should say, though, the goal of this is to give that workshop experience. So if you're new here, please do leave as many comments as you can in the chat windows on Facebook or YouTube. I'll read them as many out loud, but the poets can read them too. We're all just trying to help each other, even by participating, get better at poetry, by figuring out how things actually work. And so leave as many comments as you can. Say what works for you, say what doesn't. I like to think about where my mind starts to wander, where I feel more engaged with a poem. I think that's the most important part to me. But we'll talk about all sorts of things and give any suggestions we have as we move along. And Rose asked if we would talk specifically about turns. She says, well, here, I might as well put it on the screen. I copied it down. She said, I've been listening to what you and Katie have been saying about turns in poems. And she's talking about the Poetry Space podcast that me and Katie Dozier do on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. The episode number 49 last week was on turns, I think. Was that the last episode? Or was it 48 2 weeks ago? Recently, we did an episode on turns. And, so turns are sort of, like the volta in a poem, like the cut in a haiku. A poem has to have a sense of movement. A poem is a transformational process. It's like this sort of magic spell we cast to transform our sort of understanding or our emotional state, or whatever that means. And so to do that, to have that sense of movement, you kind of have to go somewhere. And we talked about this in the Poetry Space a little bit, about whether all poems had to have a turn, or whether like a graceful arc was a turn. Yeah, it must have been episode 48, because Whitman was 49. That was fun, of the Poetry Space. But a turn is sort of a sharper, maybe, sense of movement, and it's most often seen in the volta of a sonnet. And so, the poem's sort of going one way, and there's a way that you can sort of zoom in or zoom out, take a different view, get a different perspective, sort of move around in the way you're viewing the poem. And then so you sort of like a setup and a punchline. You get the reader on board, and then you take them somewhere. And that sense that sudden taking somewhere is the turn, the volta in a sonnet. So that's what we're talking about, turns. And it's kind of similar too. It's sort of how you define it. Similar to the way I was just cutting down a shortened version of the Michael Dylan Welch episode number 180 of the Rattlecast, where we're talking about haiku and talking about that cut and how there's sort of two things in every haiku. And we talked about it for a while, whether or not you needed sort of juxtaposition in a haiku, like a one thing set up next to another thing. And even the examples that Michael could come up with where you had only one thing in the poem, there was sort of an implied second thing, you know? And that's the same kind of thing happens in a poem. So many poems don't go anywhere because they don't have any turns. And if they don't go anywhere, they don't change you. They don't have that sort of transformational effect that we really appreciate and makes the top of your head come off. And so poems need turns, and maybe, maybe a gradual sense of movement is not called a turn. Yeah, PMB says Tundra is a great example. I think I'm trying to think of the one Michael Dillon watched. He was talking about one of his own in this interview, and it was something like, I don't want to paraphrase it wrong, but whatever. It was like spring melt, the old scarf reveals itself one thread at a time, or something like that. And so there's a ... at the end, because you realize it's like the birds that are taking the thread away to make a nest. And even though there's sort of one image in the poem, there's sort of this implied second place too. So even there's these two places. You sort of start somewhere and you end up somewhere else. And that's really the transformational effect that makes the poem like a magic spell. And it's pretty universal to all poems. So that's what we were talking about on the poetry space. And let's take a look at the poems that Rose sent in. So the first one is Downhill. Oh, I don't think I finished reading this. So I showed Downhill to a friend, and he thought it felt like two separate poems. I'd love your feedback on whether the turns work, whether the poems are coherent, and any other comments, of course. So, of course, we're happy to do that, Rose. And here we go with Downhill. Downhill. I dreamed my friend was cycling fast ahead of me, and his aged father was in some kind of seat built on the front of the bike. As they sped away downhill, the old man turned back, and I saw the slack folds of his face split silly, with his gap-toothed grin, and the wind whipped the thin, greasy strands of his hair like underwater seaweed. If in my old age some dear friend were to whirl me, safe, screaming my joy downhill, the notion takes me back to childhood. My sister pushing me in the old-fashioned pram as fast as her legs could go, and much as she loved to make me squeal delight, I feared what she was pushing was also the idea of being rid of me. A final shove, the big-wheeled chariot overturned, her birthright crown reclaimed. Now she sends penciled letters across the ocean, asks me to visit her there. She is bound by rules of her community. She thinks I am free to fly. She asks me to come. I say maybe soon. Yeah, and so that is Downhill by Rose Lennard. And I think I can see pretty clearly why the friend, I think, thinks there are two turns in this poem. And it's interesting, too, because we were talking about that with that Michael Dillon Welch podcast I was just talking about. Because in a haiku, you don't want three. You don't want two cuts, so you have three sections. Because that gets to be too much. And he didn't really elaborate on why, but you can feel it, that it's sort of cluttered and it doesn't have the same effect if you have two different big turns in a little haiku, of course. In this poem, it kind of feels like there's two turns. And the one turn, to me, the first turn was really good. The second one was sort of unnecessary because we already had that effect created. So but let's take a closer look. I dreamed my friend was cycling fast ahead of me, and his aged father was in some kind of seat built on the front of the bike. So as Tom Barlow says, what great descriptions. And it's really a great opening to the poem because we really get to see this vividly. I mean, we know it's a dream, so you're not going to do that like, oh, it was all a dream kind of thing at the end. And, we're ready to accept that. But then we still see it really clearly and concretely. As they sped away downhill, the old man turned back, and I saw the slack folds of his face split silly with his gap-toothed grin, and the wind whipped the thin, greasy strands of his hair like underwater seaweed. So just the whole thing, that whole first four couplets, great descriptions. And let's talk about this too, because Dick Westheimer says, question for all. What do you think about I dreamed? Is it necessary? A distraction? And I think... I don't know. It's a really good question. I think if we read it without that, would we lose anything? Or jumping right into the dream, is that fine? You can look at a lot of more surreal poets, and they just jump right into the strangeness of what's going on, and we still accept that because we're sort of willing to accept whatever sort of spell you want to cast within a poem. And I'm not sure if you need the the I dreamed or not, but the fact that it's a dream might be important too. So I could really see it go either way. So it was downhill. My friend was cycling fast ahead of me, and his aged father was in some kind of seat built on the front of the bike. What you get by the I dreamed, really, is not having anybody question that the aged father in some kind of seat. Like would an aged father really be in a seat? Like people love to point out where that's not realistic, And so by having the I dreamed, you get rid of that question. So I think, to me, my first thought is that it kind of helps because you can just accept that this isn't real, and just appreciate these beautiful images. And like PMB says, split silly with a gap-toothed grin. We can all see it, says Mary Keating. And yeah, it's really nice. So a really great start to the poem. And then here's the first turn in the poem. If in my old age some dear friend were to whirl me. So we go from this vision of the friend cycling the aged father, and then we shift. That's the turn where we set up the scene. I mean, you see the turn very clearly here. We set up the scene, bicycling with the father in some kind of seat in the front. Then we imagine me, the speaker, being in that seat. So there's a turn right there. Yeah. And about the dream, Dick says, I generally don't like dream qualifier, but here it does seem important. And I think so. It's only because it's strange to have a aged father in a sort of a bike basket, and so you get rid of that question. But anyway, so the turn is here. So it turns into, what if I were there in that seat, like this aged father in the dream? If in my old age some dear friend were to whirl me safe, screaming my joy downhill, the notion takes me back to childhood. And so this is sort of all one sort of complicated turn. I wonder if maybe we could smooth it out and sort of combine it a little bit so we get to it quicker. Not even saying, you kind of want to avoid things like suddenly, blah, blah, blah. But you could also just shift, and suddenly I am in the seat, screaming downhill, and the notion reminds me, or takes me back to childhood. Because we're already in a dream. We might as well just put you there and sort of skip the step of you having to say you're imagining it. So we could sort of get through that, I think, transition quicker than we do here. But I think this works really nicely as a turn in the poem. The notion takes me back to childhood, my sister pushing me in the old-fashioned pram as fast as her legs could go. And so we sort of shift who's pushing what in this. And I think, like I said again, I would just go right in because you already established it's a dream. Just throw yourself right in there. And suddenly I'm in the front seat and my sister's pushing me. I think that's a good, and it reminds me of this history. But then we get another great detail, the old-fashioned pram, as fast as their legs could go. You can really see that too. I mean, it's pretty simple imagery, but the concreteness and the solidness of that makes it really vivid in our heads. Okay. As much as she loved to make me squeal, delight, I feared what she was pushing was also the idea, and a little play on the pushing there, which I like, was also the idea of being rid of me. A final shove, the big-wheeled chariot overturned, her birthright crown reclaimed. And so I like the transition here. What's not satisfying is this, because I think it's kind of not developed. It feels like since we turned into this section of me being pushed, we kind of want to know more about the story of what the sister does. Instead, now she sends penciled letters across the ocean. And so we get another kind of turn with the now. Where we sort of, do you see how we're in the dream, the aged father's in the basket, suddenly in this vision, the speaker's in the basket, so that's one turn, and then now we're sort of in the present again, and she sends penciled letters across the ocean, asks me to visit her there. She is bound by rules of her community. She thinks I am free to fly. She asks me to come. I say maybe soon. And so now we're in the present with this last two stanzas, but I don't think it's really elaborated on or explained. Yeah. And so I think, let's see. Yeah. So to me, it feels like with the pacing of the poem, with the way that it turns here, you want to have some kind of resolution about how these two things connect coming up in this spot. And instead we add this, which opens up more mystery. So I think the two options are to cut this and just end her birthright reclaimed. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Her birthright reclaimed, and then have some kind of way to finish the poem that's sort of quick and sort of get out at that point. The other option is to explain the situation and push this part further. And so it's sort of like a poem that, there's like a fork in the road, and it almost like half took both forks, and so didn't end up on a path. That's kind of how it feels to me. And so it sort of has to pick which way it wants to go, but it hasn't yet. Let's see. So Katie Doder says, I would go from downhill, my sister pushing me. The downhill, where is it? Downhill. Yeah, okay, so here. So Katie Dozier would drop this, the notion takes me back to childhood. So if we cut that and pull this up. If in my old age some dear friend were to whirl me, safe, screaming, my joy downhill, my sister pushing me in the old-fashioned pram as her legs go faster. Yeah, I think, having the notion is another one of those things that it slows it down and spreads it out. And I think just jumping does help. I think you need a little more than just jumping straight to it, though, because it goes from a friend. It could just... what I would really do is maybe not say it exactly like this, but skip all of this and say, if in my old age some dear friend, this is what I would cut. And I would just say, and suddenly my sister is pushing me back in childhood, my sister pushing me in the old-fashioned pram, and I'd jump through it like that. But still, I think that the main thing remains. The poem is set up really well, but the conclusion, the delivery of where it's going hasn't been resolved yet. I think there's there's something there that was, the instigating itch of the poem, the thing that was sort of gnawing at you about this dream, first of all, and then how it relates to your sister. I think it's like sort of great dream analysis. If it was a real dream, it's like the way you want to analyze a dream. And that's how you want to write a poem, in the same way you would analyze a dream, really. Like why am I getting these images? What do they mean? And you mine that to try to figure out what your subconscious is trying to tell you. And I think, it just didn't get to the heart of what that relationship is, in a way. And so why would the sister, why would she want her birthright crown reclaimed? Like, why was it lost to be reclaimed? Like, that question comes up. I'm not sure why. And then where is she now? Why is she across the ocean? Why does she want to visit? It just raises more questions with the way it's presented than answers. And so I think we have to dig in deeper, or sort of settle on for this reclaimed and just explain really quickly what that story actually is about being reclaimed. And so that's what I do with this poem. Let's see. Oh, so Katie Dozer, so she was saying have the space for the transition. So like this. And so that would be another jump. If in my old age some dear friend were to whirl me safe, screaming my joy downhill, and then there's this jump, my sister pushing me in the old-fashioned pram as fast. Sorry, I hate this. I wish you could get rid of those little boxes from Word. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but they're never helpful. Anyway, yeah, that's one way to do it. But I think to me, and I think that does work nicely as a transition to get rid of the sort of the wordiness of that section. And it is nice to be able to jump, because you're in a dream, you might as well jump. But I think this, having the friend, having to sort of have us visualize, it's like a different place for no reason. Like having us visualize another friend, not the sister, whirling me later in my own old age. That's like this whole other little scene that we built, and there's really no reason for that to even be there. Another poet puts it perfectly here. She says, yes, I wondered why she believed the sister wanted to be rid of her. That feels like the heart of the poem. And that's the thing. That's exactly the thing. And two, does that apply to this? Is the aged father, do we want to be rid of the aged father? Is that some kind of deep-seated thing that's being explored too? We just don't really know. You can feel there's a real poem here. There's a scene in a dream that's described really vividly, but then we haven't really figured out what it means or the progression of it yet. And so I think this is a dig deeper poem to me, and I think really nicely done. Otherwise, I think Katie said, tried in couplets, or not in couplets, but sort of condensed more. I think that was Katie who said that. And so, oops, I should put that line back, though. In, yeah. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh yeah, that thing. Jerry Rossen says now she's bound by the rules of her community. Like I didn't understand that too. So there's a lot of mystery that's just not resolved. Sorry. Yeah, I switched back to using Word for some reason. I was using Google Docs the last several months, and the controls are a little different. But anyway, Dick Buncham is there's the key. A callback to the aged father might reveal something to the poet. Anyway, by the way, Mom, who are going to be watching this later, you're calling me right now, but I can't answer. Anyway, so that's the right to say. I think the poem's really set up nice, really vivid. It paints the scene really well, but then it has to explore the actual content more. Okay, let's look at the other poem. And the other poem is 6th of August. And again, this is Rose Lennard, 6th of August. And she didn't mention turns in this poem, but it's something you should always be watching for. Where does the poem move? What changes in the poem? And so, yeah. I mean, I really do think of poems as magic spells. And they're sort of words in a certain order that create a transformation. And that sense of you're not the same place where you started is really central to it. And if it comes in a sharp turn, that's great. If it comes in a more gradual one, but it has to move in some way. So it's always something good to look at, even if it wasn't specifically what we wanted to look at here. Let me look back at Facebook. Just still Jenny Middleton. You're the only one who found it, Jenny. And Jenny says she thinks it's about a sibling rivalry. Also, there could be a deeper message about competitive women. Yeah, I think there's a lot of places to go. And she also mentioned, someone else mentioned this too. Why does she pencil letters? Where was that? Yeah, the pencil. It's an interesting detail. It's very specific. Normally you'd say like penned letters, but why a pencil? There's just a lot of mystery at the end of this poem. Okay, but let's look at 6th of August. When a great tree falls, witnessed or not, this is not the end. At first, the trunk straddles awkward on stiff knees and elbows of broken branches. Its microclimate alters in guilds of mosses, beetles, bugs adjust. Bark shrinks from drying flesh, opens up undiscovered country beneath. Fibers soften, with heavy grace the tree subsides to lay full length upon the welcoming ground, intimate with fecund earth at last. Squirrels claim it as a runway, deer spring dainty over, maybe a bear claws honey from a hollow, tears the soft rot. The tree is home and feast to termites, fungi, worms, it teems. Long decades pass, carbon that once was trunk, bark, branch, leaf, or twig finds other forms, restless shapeshifter, cycling, stardust while eternity spins. A hiker might see the long shadow of the once tree painted in sawdust, still just discernible beside the trail, and maybe he be reminded of the shadows of women, men, children who do not die of old age, illness, or falling in a forest, but vaporize in a splitting of an atom, and their bodies in that last instant too sudden to run for cover, shielded walls or steps or sidewalks searing light and radiation blasted, left each life's final heartbeat printed, dark ghosts on the streets of Hiroshima, for those who were not there to witness. So that, another strong turn in that poem, and a surprising one too. Let's see, to me, I really like that too. I like the way, it goes to some unexpected place. That's exactly what we're talking about, where we sort of set up, we're sort of, the beginning gets us along for the ride by using interesting images and details, and then we sort of take a journey somewhere. And I think that worked pretty well in the poem. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So, to me, I think, I was just looking at some of the comments as they start to come in. To me, it felt a little too long. Like there's sort of a long meandering before you get to this turn. And I think that the turn doesn't have to come late. And, it should come once we've established the beginning, the opening like sequence. And to me, it took too long to get to it. So it feels a little imbalanced to me. And so I think I would maybe condense the beginning of the poem. And you also notice too, and this may be subconscious, but the stanzas, they're 5 lines, 5 lines, 5 lines, 4 lines. And then when we get to sort of the poem sort of ramps up, we end up with 3 lines, and then 2 at the very end. And I think that, maybe that was something that was done intentionally, but it also feels like the poem is that way. It's sort of too wordy and slow at the beginning. And then when the poem sort of finds itself and finds where it really wants to go, it, yeah, and that's exactly what Gary Rossman was just saying, is the setup too long for the conclusion. I think that's the case. And I think there's, if you made it 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines, and then maybe 2 at the end or whatever, I think that's how the poem wants to be. And I think maybe even visually it ended up maybe subconsciously that way on the page. So I would trim out like 40% of the, of the excess in these first, 4 stanzas, and get to the turn a little quicker. So Deb T says the same thing. And I agree about condensing the beginning of the poem, describing the tree. And Mary Keating says, great description in this poem, like the contrast of natural decay to an atomic bomb could cut some of the tree decay description. Yeah, so we stuck on the tree a little too long at the beginning. And the 6th of August, is that the day that the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima? I mean, I remember it was August. I'm going to assume, I'm not going to look it up. I think that is. And so the title comes into meaning. We don't know why the 6th of August matters. It's not a huge day that we, it's not like one of those dates that you just see it and know. At least I don't. But it is a date that once you realize the connection, you know what it meant. And so it's a nice title, sort of a callback type title. So let's see what we can cut from this beginning. When a great tree falls, witnesses or not, this is not the end. Or witnessed or not, this is not the end. At first, the trunk straddles awkward on stiff knees and elbows of broken branches. Its microclimate alters, and guilds of mosses, beetles, bugs adjust. Bark shrinks from drying flesh, opens up undiscovered country beneath. See, so here, this is one of the things I would probably do. I'd just say, let it be sort of listy at this point, and I would get rid of this and just say like, what was the word? Bark shrink. Yeah, bark shrinks. Sorry, cut one too many words. Bark shrinks, fibers soften. Let's see what else we'd cut. With a heavy grace, the tree subsides to lay full length upon the welcoming ground. See, welcoming ground is a bit cliche. Oh yeah, that reminds me. There was a cliche type line in the first poem that it just passed right over. That squeal with the delight. I would not squeal with delight, by the way. I forgot to highlight that one, but I think that's a little too cliche. And here I think, the welcoming ground is a little too, it's not quite cliche. It's sort of this, I don't know, cliche and trite are kind of 2 words that have this weird little overlap, and it's kind of in that little between them feeling. But it's not as interesting as others' phrases. So, bark shrinks, fibers soften, the tree subsides. Let's see. Like the tree subsides to earth. I just say it that simply, maybe. Maybe not even at last. Like we just zip through here a little faster and we get the same images. Squirrels claim there's a runway, deer, spring dainty. I like that. Deer, spring dainty over. Maybe a bear. I think the maybe, when we're already speculating, you don't need to say maybe. There's that famous, when Ezra Pound was editing, was it Proof Rock or The Wasteland? I think Proof Rock. He cuts out one perhaps. He writes, perhaps be damned. And, and there's that, those kind of hedges you don't need. You just jump straight to it. And so the maybe a bear, just make a bear do it. It's your poem. It's your imaginary fantasy world that you're creating for us. So make a bear do it. Don't need that maybe. A bear claws honey from a hollow. I like the honey from a hollow. Great sounds there. Tears a soft rot. I like that too because you can really see and feel that. The tree is home and feast to termites, fungi, worms. So I think we already had the mosses, beetles, bugs. So the termites, fungi, worms feels too much. I think one of the reasons why it feels like there's too much here is because we get those two lists. And there's really no reason to have two lists. So I'd maybe say something like the tree is a feast of termites. It teems. I kind of like that part. So I do something like this. And when I do this with a poem, it's just like suggestions. I mean, I'm just kind of playing with it. But you just play with it and see how it feels and how the sound still functions as you're trimming things out. And I would maybe consider doing that. It teems. And then I send it along. We just say decades pass. So I'm just trimming here. That's all. It's like a haircut for the poem. Decades pass. Carbon that once was trunk, bark, branch, leaf, or twig finds other forms. I would say I would keep this list shorter too. I would say like maybe a trunk, a branch. I think we already said bark ahead. Yeah, we said bark shrinks. So I maybe go trunk, a branch, and just leave it there. Let us know that kind of the list continues. Carbon that was once a trunk, a branch finds other forms. Restless shapeshifter, cycling sawdust. Restless and shapeshifter maybe is too much, but I like the restless cycling sawdust while eternity spins. That's nice. A hiker might see. So here we trimmed out 30% maybe of the words and got it to yeah. And that's just an idea, but that's kind of what I would do. Decades pass. Carbon that once was a trunk, a branch finds other forms. Restless cycling stardust while eternity spins. Maybe change the syntax of that a little bit, but I like the concept. I'd put that more listy, but I still like the image. Hiker might see the long shadow of the once tree. Again with the might. Just make the hiker see it. The hiker sees the long shadow of the once tree painted in sawdust, still discernible beside the trail, and maybe, and is reminded of the shadows of women, men, children who did not die of old age, illness, or falling in a forest, but vaporized. And this is a nice, too. So we fast forward and turn to the hiker, but we still don't know sort of why or what's going to come. And it's really surprising here where we're suddenly vaporized by the splitting of an atom. You're like, what? Like, it's kind of snapped out in an interesting way. There's a lot of surprise in that movement. And their bodies in that last instant, too sudden to run for cover. Shielded walls or steps or sidewalks as searing light and radiation blasted, left each life's final heartbeat printed, dark ghost on the streets of Hiroshima for those who were not there to witness. Yeah. Mercury says keeps shapeshifter, and maybe that's right. There's something that we were losing, and I just kind of glossed over. I like the concept, but it's a little clunky. So up there, I don't know. And I think maybe, but do you see how this turn, unlike the other poem, this turn kind of went somewhere? The hiker sees something, and then there's that really nice layering with the way, the trees left in this too. Yeah. Yeah, as Dick Wetterman says, perhaps and maybe and might have are parts of a universe of qualifiers that kill the flow of a poem for me. Yeah, I mean, there's some poems where there's a voice who sort of equivocates and doesn't, you can't really pin down, and you can do sort of a, like a persona poem or dramatic monologue with that. But for the most part, it's better to avoid that and just, be bold and just say what's happening and don't be afraid of the fact that you're planting an idea and an image right in our heads. That's what we want you to do. We signed up to read a poem, so don't be afraid to force an idea into us. You don't have to hedge it. Yeah. Looking at the Yeah, I think I'd probably trim, even looking at it more, I'd probably still trim more from this and get to it faster. Because I love seeing the tree. I love seeing its decay, slowly and how it changes. And then moving to the hiker. I really like that. And so I think I'd cut that even more. But otherwise, I think it's a really nice poem. Does anybody have any other suggestions? PMB says maybe the title of the poem could be a name of a forest near Hiroshima to put us there. Well, I think we're already sort of put... And I'm not sure if we're in... I mean, there's no reason the forest has to be there. It's just what the hiker thinks of. And what is that? There still seems... I'm not sure if where it goes is one of those... some poems that sort of sets up a comparison, and you're sort of happy to mull over it because there's a lot there and you can feel it, and it's like new and fresh, and you can kind of turn it in your head. And the comparison between those sort of shadows of after a nuclear blast and in the fallen tree, and the way that it sort of leaves its shadow of its actual fibers on the ground, there's something really interesting there. That I'm not sure if it works well enough. But it's something that sort of you turn and sort of mull over in your head, and then have a kind of satisfying conclusion eventually to that. Like, you don't want to have that kind of poem that has that ambiguous comparison, and then there's not enough there to satisfy the fact that you've been mulling it over, if that makes sense. And I'm not sure if there's enough or not. I'm kind of torn. It's right on the fringe, just for me personally. Sometimes we publish poems, from time to time that I'm like, I don't really know exactly what this means, but I like thinking about it. It's surprising, interesting to sort of leave you with that image and that comparison or that metaphor, and you're sort of, it just sort of sticks with you. You don't know why, and it works like that. And this is right on the cusp of doing that. But if it doesn't do that, you kind of want to come to more of a conclusion yourself and sort of help us along a little more and be a little more, direct with where it goes. So I'm kind of, I don't know. What does everybody think about that? About the comparison? Yeah. Lisa Seidenberg says something interesting, and so this is kind of the thing I was talking about. It leaves us hanging with this comparison, and if it's the kind of thing that we enjoy mulling over, then I think it works. If not, Lisa Seidenberg says, could the poem end with "While Eternity Spins"? Up here. Well, I guess that's too high. I think we need the hiker. Yeah. I'm not sure you could shorten it either. I don't know. I like that. So anyway, let's see. Let me see if Jenny Middleton, the only one over. Oh, we have some more people over on Facebook. I found it. Yeah, so for those coming in late, Facebook thought I was in the wrong time zone. So when I put 1 p.m., it does not list which time zone it thinks you're in. And so it thought I was still Central Time, even though I was sitting right here in California. So according to the original Facebook thread, it started 2 hours early, and then it was too late, and so I had to make a whole new page. But anyway. But Jenny Middleton says pain grows through the imagery. It's a good way to put it. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, and Emily Elizabeth Arnold Fernandez is here too, and suggests some of the things I think earlier that we haven't already said. So anyway, let's move on to the other poems. So interesting poems, Rose. And I think, in general, because we like to look at two poems so we can see sort of a tendency. And I think that the tendency maybe to push a little deeper and challenge yourself a little more, interrogate the reason why the poem was written into being a little bit deeper. But otherwise, I think that great images and great painting of a scene and creating a space that we can enter and feel and connect with. Okay, so let's take a look at the other poet for this week, and it's Ginel Basiga Ople. And as she says, I just want to thank Rattle for doing this. Been a fan of Critique of the Week for years. So that's nice. Thanks for saying that, Ginel. But let's see what the poems are. So this is in the five-star hotel where we held the office conference. All right, so again, or not really again, but it's a really nice title because it really sets the stage for what we're going to read. You know, in the five-star hotel where the office conference, where we held the office conference. So there's already sort of the sense of that we know it's a five-star hotel, so we get a sense of that setting, and we know it's an office conference. So we have a whole bunch of sort of cues and contextual details already before we even start the poem. So it's a nice use of the title to start with. There's the same artwork in every room. Sorry, hang on a second. Okay, I might have a sneeze too, but I can't. Okay, anyway, I'll push the button if I can do it in time. But okay, in the five-star hotel where we held the office conference, there's the same artwork in every room. Diamond patterns alternating between yellow and gray. I saw it when I first checked in, framed above the TV, reflecting me sprawled out on the sofa, waiting for the floor-level AC to cool my naked feet. I saw it by the refreshments table at the back of the function room, watching me pocket blister packs of butter without any bread. And I'm seeing it again at the after party in Wendell's room, where we sit on the carpet passing around PET bottles of leftover cocktails from the dining hall, talking about how we learn nothing here today. Tomorrow, before we leave, I'll think about it one more time, then take one of the 3 complimentary apples sitting untouched on the coffee table. Sometimes I believe the country cares about me. So that's really, I really like the delivery of this poem. It's really nice. Again, another poem, all 3 we've seen today have really a lot of great details, even though totally different settings here for this poem. We see it just as vividly as with Rose's poems. It's really nicely done. And I like this too. The lead-in is really great. The opening of the poem, because we had this, like we said, we had this title that gives us a lot of detail about where we are. And then we jump right into this sort of blunt statement that has a lot of loadedness in with that statement. There's the same artwork in every room. And that really is a telling kind of, but blunt and simple comment. So I like there's a juxtaposition too between having that much detail in the title and then this like blunt, simple statement that has a lot behind it is the first line. So it's a really nice move, just sort of musically and artistically. Diamond patterns alternating between yellow and gray. I saw it when I first checked in, framed above the TV, reflecting me sprawled out on the sofa, waiting for the floor-level AC to cool my naked feet. And that's just a great sentence, too. And we had these sort of shorter, snappier sentences before, a sentence fragment here, and then we get a sort of luxurious sentence as we're, like, sprawling out on the sofa in great detail, which is a nice way that the shape of the syntax is mirroring what's going on in the poem too, which is really nice. And it's just laid out really well. So I really love the poem, up to that part at least. I saw it by the refreshments table at the back of the function room, watching me pocket blister packs of butter without any bread. And again, great details there, listing where we saw it. And I'm right along for the ride because these details are so specific. A lot of times in the other critiques where we're just cruising through poems, that feel like more like regular submissions. Those are the kind of details you don't get. Like those concrete, specific details just really make a poem come to life. And so we really are in this place. And there's a humor, too, to pocketing the blister packs of butter without any bread. And so it's just really nice and entertaining, and I like it. And I'm seeing it again at the after party in Wendell's room where we sit on the carpet passing around PET bottles. I'm not sure what that is. Is that the kind of plastic it is? PET bottles, or is that something else? I turn on Do Not Disturb. That one's just spam, though. Anyway, is PET, is that the kind of plastic, like a cheap plastic bottle? Is that too obscure if that's what it is? I don't know. Or is that something else that I just don't even know? I'd maybe just say plastic. That detail there seems too... it's so specific that it feels like you need to know what it is. Yeah. So Mary Picot says, yes, indicates recyclable. Yeah. And Macadoba says, I bet the author is European. Actually, I think Ginel is in the Philippines. Yeah, and says Dick Westheimer says plastic would be less of a distraction than PET, and I think that's what I just say. I just say plastic bottles. Passing around plastic bottles of leftover cocktails from the dining hall, talking about how we learn nothing here today. Tomorrow, before I leave, I'll think about it one more time. I think the it maybe, I maybe go back to the painting, because we're seeing it so much that I think, to me, I kind of lose a sense of what the it is eventually. Yeah. And so I think at this point, I'd call back to the painting just to refresh our memory and make sure that we all know what we're talking about. We're all on the same page here. So I think tomorrow before I leave, I'll think about the painting one more time. I'm just going to put that in because I think that's important, actually, at that point. One more time, and maybe change the line breaks if that line feels too long. But I think about the painting one more time, then take one of the 3 complimentary apples sitting untouched on the coffee table. Sometimes I believe the company cares about me. Yeah, so to me, I think, who said, let's see, Tom Barlow says, we learn nothing, a very subtle turn. I feel like I want more about what the descriptions mean to the poet. To me, I think it does enough. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I think there's a humor undercutting it, and then there's a, Duffy's Farm kind of ending here. Sometimes I believe the company cares about me is a kind of turn into a conclusion. And I think, we get the point, we didn't know, we didn't really know what the poem was about, why we were being given these like great descriptions and painting the scene, even with the humor and the little details and stuff that were great along for the ride. We don't really know the point until, all this is building to the fact that the sort of ambiguous nature of how much the company cares about you. And I think that that's a real feeling of so much of just the corporate world or large companies in general, or anywhere there's conferences. I mean, there are all these little, conveniences laid out as if people really care. But then there's this sort of, there's this distance and impersonality to it all too. And I think that the poem captures that really well, and the ambiguity of sort of believing, but then not believing at the same time that you're being cared for in a situation like that. I think it works, for me, it works really well. As Brian O'Sullivan says, I like that the poem mildly trashes the conference. We learn nothing, but still entertains the possibility that the company cares. Good cognitive dissonance. Dick Westheimer says this, and I think maybe too. He says, I'm curious about the painting. If they're all the same, something feels off. And I wonder if maybe something could be different in the paintings, but most of it's the same. I did feel that too. It was a little hard to believe that the paintings were identical at the same time. There's a little bit of like a Potemkin Village kind of thing to that aspect of it that felt a little strange. Rose says, I find it quite bleak, but maybe that's the point. And I think so. There's sort of just a dark humor to the poem. Mary Keating has a nice point. So taking one apple instead of all 3 tells us about the speaker, and it does. PMB says, I wish I could live in a hotel. Joseph Redke says, I love In Wendell's Room. I don't know who Wendell is, but I kind of do. And yeah, I like that too. There's certain ways, a detail like a name that we don't know, it creates an air of intimacy that I think it's one little trick you can do. Like, you don't have to describe who you're talking about. You can just feel like you know us well enough to know who Wendell is. It adds a lot of, Deb T says this is a poem that trusts the reader, doesn't over-explain. Rose says, tiny point, it should be complimentary, not complimentary. Yeah, that's right. Good edit there. A funny thing, when we used to do ebooks, it used to be a complimentary ebook of Rattle that came with it. And I put complimentary one time by accident, and it went out in the back of those fly sheets. And then somebody told me about it, and I made this whole long email explaining why it really was, in this case, complimentary. But of course, it was not. It was just a typo. I can finally confess that 10 years later. Let's see. I don't know, to me, like, what would you... I'm not really sure how to improve the poem. I think it's a nice poem. I think... I don't know. I think you need to pull up the painting one more time. I do like Dick Wonder. Yeah, this is the thing. So Brian goes, something that says complimentary can also mean free. And that's the thing. So I was like, it's free. But it also is like a supplement too. So anyway. Yeah. So what would you... I don't know. This is one of those poems that I think, I think the one edit I had, I'd add the painting in there to call back so we don't forget what it is. City Government says it's a nice poem. And just the details are great. There's a dark humor to it, and there's a point to it. I think the poem just really works. I'm sorry for not having more to suggest about it. It'd be one of those poems, if it were submitted, we'd be, I'd pull it out and I'd talk about it and we'd say, like, does it do enough? Is it something that's going to stick with you? And, there's a lot of poems that, totally great and publishable and should be published and shared, but it just doesn't quite do enough, have enough stickiness, enough resonance, and it can't given the topic, I don't know. So I wonder. Oh yeah, and Plastic for PET is another. And so this is one of those poems that, like, I'm already wondering, like, is it just doing enough already? And I think maybe it does. I think it's a nice poem. Let's just move on to the other one, because I don't have anything else to say. Let me look at Facebook. Does anybody else have it? So Dave Jacob says, I like this, but the poem undermines the claim of this being held in a 5-star hotel. Everything points to a chain hotel, including the way the poet feels about their employer. And I think that's part of it too. I mean, I think that's intentional to me, because it doesn't feel 5-star at all. And I don't know, maybe... Nate Jacob says, again, more tension between a lavish hotel setting versus the actual treatment by the company would add to it. Yeah, so maybe that could be played up. Maybe, really, if the point is the company, but I think the poem works. I think we maybe end up overanalyzing something that's a working poem, because I think one of the reasons why the poem works is because you don't know the whole way through if you're really complaining about the hotel or the company, and then at the end you kind of think you're complaining about the company. You're still kind of ambiguous, but you sort of shift in that direction. But the whole thing is done really subtly. Yeah. But I think, seeing the same, like, sort of patterned painting in a 5-star hotel, it would be surprising and something you would notice. It's unexpected, and the fact that it's unexpected, I think, works. So I don't know. Yeah, the Dick Viper says, if I saw this in Rattle, I would not be surprised. It really is so close. And and there's poems that sort of are on that fence, and it's just kind of like, what we'd see what Alan and Megan thought, and just kind of have a hunch about it, Yeah, well, that's an interesting poem. Thanks for sharing that. I like the subtlety and the humor a lot, and the sort of and the amount that you, as someone said, trust the reader. Lets the reader do a lot of work, and it pays off ultimately, and I think makes it a strong poem for it. Okay, let's do the other one, Auld Lang Syne. So a good timely poem. Well, I guess it's already a month after Auld Lang Syne, but time goes by fast. So this is again, it's Ginel Besiga Ople, and the poem is Auld Lang Syne. This man, too, had seen colors, been to parties long ago where it was he buried in a woman's face. Was he stumbling across a ballroom holding somebody else's drink? Was he starting the new year in the middle of a scream? How cruel and how fair to remember fondly the times that he can no longer be. At midnight, he grabs his coat and hat, not looking back to see who's staring. Bagpipes spill from open windows. His boot heels clop against the pavement. He finds himself humming. So again, another poem that Sorry, just reading some more comments from the last poem, which I shouldn't do that probably. When I move on, we should just move on. But there's like a little delay and then the comments come. But anyway, so Auld Lang Syne, again, this is a nicely detailed poem. It's a poem that allows a lot of space. One thing that's a little different, this poem above, we didn't talk about it at all, but it has the first line, the first letter of each line capitalized, which I know we've talked about in the past, as some people don't like that and feel it's off-putting. This poem doesn't do that, which is an interesting choice. In my experience looking at poems, usually people have a preference and do it one way or the other. So that's interesting that this uses regular capitalization or sentence case, I guess you'd say, instead of verse case or whatever. But anyway, Auld Lang Syne, let's read it again a little more slowly. This man, too, had seen colors, been to parties long ago where it was he buried in a woman's face. Was he stumbling across a ballroom, holding somebody else's drink? Was he starting the new year in the middle of a scream? Yeah. How cruel and how fair to remember fondly the times that can no longer be. At midnight he grabs his coat and hat, not looking back to see who's staring. Bagpipes spill from open windows. His boot heels clop against the pavement. He finds himself humming. And I really love, that's the thing. I feel a little lost in the poem. I'm not really quite sure, what's going on. Yeah. But at the end is so strong that I'm sort of, it takes me away, and I like the poem by the end. Brian O'Sullivan says, I capitalize first letters of lines when I forget to reverse words, automatic formatting. That's funny. But I love the humming, and then it's a nice callback to the title, because we realize it's humming Auld Lang Syne, and, we already kind of knew what kind of party it was, but it's a nice callback, and leaving the party is interesting. His boot heels clop against the pavement. PMB says clop with a questioning on the chin emoji. Tom Barrow says puts a lot of pressure on the title. So I'm just I'm not sure if I get enough out of this poem. I think the other poem, is really, really perfectly done. I think a great, well done, executed, interesting poem. And the question was am I going to carry this with me? Do I care enough? Am I going to take it with me? This one I feel a little bit too left out at the beginning. Gary Rawson says too many New Year's parties. Yeah. Because, yeah. And Gary Rawson says the world's too much for him. So this man too, and maybe it's the two, and who this man is. This man, too, had seen colors, been to parties long ago where it was he buried in a woman's face. I like that. The way it's described. The description is just great, slightly unusual in a way that's really provocative and evocative. Where it was he buried in a woman's face is a really great, fresh way to say that surprising line break and stanza break there. Where it was he buried in a woman's face, was he, I think maybe you want the it. To me, I trip over this a little bit, and I think if you're repeating in this structure, I'd add the it's. So it was he stumbling across a ballroom. Again, in a similar way to why you had to have the painting instead of it's. You had to call back. You have to sort of keep the chain of the list going, or else you risk the reader getting a little lost. So I would add the it. It was he. And maybe what it is... Maybe the thing that I feel that feels off about the first half for me is that the directness of in the sort of the omniscience maybe of knowing that he is starting the new year in the middle of the scream sort of clashes with the distance and the fact that we don't really know who the man is, and so there's something a little off to me that feels a little off about that. But then I like this, but then it moves on from that. How cruel and how fair to remember fondly. And I think that fair to remember fondly is a nice use of the alliteration. It's nice sound to it. The slightly unusual syntax, which really heightens it and makes it interesting. Especially too, when you have sort of interesting things, unusual syntax, unusual ways of saying things. It's really nice to have a poem like laid out like this with a lot of white space and a lot of sort of room to absorb that sort of strangeness. So I like that. How cruel and how fair to remember fondly the times that can no longer be. At midnight he grabs his coat and hat, not looking back to see who's staring. Again, this is great too. Bagpipes spill from open windows. His boots and heels clop against the pavement. He finds himself humming. Yeah, Mary Picot says perhaps it's a surprise that he's humming at the end, since it's a poem of the past which he apparently no longer is enjoying, not looking back, and yet here we are looking back. That's nice. It is. There's a nice quality to that. I really like the second half of the poem. I think that I'd like to know a little bit more about who this man is. And maybe we could do that with a title. It's just, it feels, yeah. Cindy Gutherman says, I like the ending, but the why of the poem feels left out. Is he too old? He was invited, but doesn't. To me, it feels like, it feels similar to the last poem. And maybe I'm sort of infected by the last poem, thinking of it as a corporate kind of thing. But I'm imagining an older senior VP type person who is sort of there, not yet retired, but still carried along and knows he's not really part of the scene anymore. Not just the party, but the whole, business. And so that's how I imagine it. Yeah. MD says, really like the tone of the poem. Would like to know more about the man at the start. To me, the problem is just really, there's just a conflict in that perspective and the knowledge of the speaker. Because knowing that the man's in the middle of a scream is a lot. That's one of the places where it's almost fitting to use one of those maybe type things. Because we're sort of speculating about that he's in the middle of a scream. And maybe we could switch it by, like, I've been that man. And maybe we could sort of get to that point of especially astute awareness by, like, sort of being him. So you could say, I've been that man, I've seen the colors, been to parties long ago where it was me buried in a woman's face, where it was me stumbling across a ballroom holding somebody else's drink, it was me starting the new year in the middle of a scream. And then we sort of feel where that's coming from. But yeah, and maybe, but I still want to know more about who that is and why we care about him, I guess maybe. So those are the two things. So maybe I would... I've been him, and if we called, if the poem is called instead a retirement party, even though it's not really what it is, but let's call it retirement party. And then let's, and so then we could, so if there's a title like that, would let us know and we could imagine this guy's retiring, then that would change the thing. But yeah, we would know sort of what to make of the man a little bit, and then we'd feel more connected to it. So if it was a retirement party, this man too had seen the colors. So maybe that. But if you did, I really do like, I've been that person. I like that idea. Lisa Seidenberg says he sounds like a proof rock character, alienated, but I think it works. MD says, it seems like there's a regret here, more of a story. So this is one of those things, and there's a great, we talk about it all the time, but there's that Heiben book that talks about the spark between these sort of, it's almost like a cut, almost like a jump, almost like a turn. And in Heiben, it's between the prose of the prose section and then the haiku. There's sort of a leap there. And then there's a leap, too, between the title and the both of them. And this is a poem that it sort of has... The title is a callback. We get to the end, he's humming. We realize he's humming Auld Lang Syne. And it's sort of a throwback that makes the poem feel like a closed loop. But the problem with a closed loop is that we didn't really get a sense of who the man was. And so I think that's the wrong type of title for a poem like this. And but if we had some kind of, and it can't be like just explaining it. It has to be some kind of leap where you come to the understanding as the reader. And so I think finding the right title might be the key here. I do, and then I like jumping in for "I've been that man," and so then you get the sense of more of a connection by using the Let's see. So Joseph Radke says interesting. So the poem answers the song's question: should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? That's interesting. Maybe I didn't think of the poem in as much detail as I could have. And maybe if you think about the lyrics there, I don't know. Oh, Decole makes a good point too. It says the poem makes me wonder why he went to the party since he left at midnight when the celebration starts. Yeah, I hadn't noticed that, but yeah, it would be at midnight he grabs his coat, so he waits till, and so there's a sense of wanting to participate. I just circle back to, I think the poem really works sort of on every level, except for this chunk right here, where we don't know why we're even noticing the man, and I think we need to know why we care about him, and I think finding a way to make us understand that, and also how we can confidently speculate that he feels like he's in the middle of a scream. So, PMB says because he's alone. Is it just because he's alone on New Year's Eve? But then why would he even go? I mean, it just raises a lot of questions that I don't feel there's a fulfilling answer to, because we don't really know the context of who this man is. I think we just need a little bit more about this man, and then this poem will work. And sorry for not having, more specific things about like line breaks and things. I think, all four of these poems today have been really good with details, with using fresh images, surprising things, line breaks. Have all been really good, especially this poem. I mean, this poem has great line breaks and great spacing. I think that the pacing of it, the size of it all works really well. And so there's really not a lot of like fine tuning to talk about. Just a matter of how do you get the poem to have the impact it could. Winston Munn says, I feel I need to know what the colors are. Yeah, that's true. That's another question that's not resolved in a satisfying way, at least by me having looked at the poem for the last 15 or 20 minutes or whatever it's been. This man too had seen the colors. What colors? Deb T says, I thought the middle of the scream was a celebratory scream when he was younger. That's a good point. So, yeah, I didn't read it that way myself, but I think you're right, Deb T. I don't think, maybe scream is the wrong word. Scream to me, it just implies so much, like a panic or like a anxiety, but I guess like a cheer is maybe more what it means, because we are, this man too had seen colors, been to parties long ago. Where it was he buried in the woman's face. It was he stumbling across the ballroom holding somebody else's drink. It was he starting the new year in the middle of a scream, and so in the middle of it, like cheering. Yeah. Yeah, Tom Brown says I appreciate the subtlety of both poems. I do. I just there's something about it that isn't quite resolved enough to make me like care enough to hold the poem with me, even though there's great lines in it. So Rose says, yeah, I think that was just me. And that's the thing you get too sometimes. And you notice this doing workshops like this, or you're just talking about how every line lands on you, that some people read things differently, and just once you fall into a rut of seeing a thing one way, you kind of forget that you could have been seeing it in a different way. And so I was thinking, given that he's leaving, that there's more of a negativity to than the partying. That's how I was reading it. But I think you're right. I think it's just the cheer of the whole room sort of screaming because the time just passed and it's a new year. And I think maybe that leads me in a slightly wrong direction, but maybe it could just be me. It's really hard to tell. But anyway, I mean, just the point is, I want to know more about the man. There's just this, it's the perspective. Because it's the two, too. There's a lot implied in that. Yeah. Gary says, I like the ending, back to the everyday but humming. Yeah, I do, too. Another part says, the bagpipes for me speak to death. Yeah, and I think that's why I had that in my head a little bit, too. PMB says, the gray man. Yeah. Yeah, so MD too read the Screamer's internal crisis in the man. That's how I read it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's sort of a little bit too much mystery. And how can you resolve that? Just by letting us in a little bit on why we're observing this man and who are we to know what he's thinking so well. Like why would the speaker be a witness at a party like this if he the two implies like that there's a sense of relating, but why would you be at a party if you felt the same way this guy does? There's just so much that I can't really resolve. I like to just feel a little more connected to the subject. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're sort of exhausted. I think we've hit on what was not working there. I think that's about it. Deb, she says, maybe I'm in the minority, but I like pretty much just as is. I like the idea of I've been that man. Yeah, I think if we switch it to the I've been that man type thing, then why we feel connected, why the speaker feels connected to both the person and feels like we need to be told the story becomes a little more clear. And maybe that one edit can be enough. So what I was saying, and I wonder if this does enough. So I've been that man, or this man. I've been this man. I've seen the colors, and then you go on like that, and then so we can. I think we feel the relationship a little bit more too if we go in that direction. But yeah, anyway, we got to wrap it up. And it has been really lovely poems. Maybe I picked 4 poems that were too good. I was just looking for the best poems in the submission queue. And there's not a whole lot to say when the poems are good already, maybe is the case. But thanks for sharing these. It's Ginel, Basiga, Ople, and Rose Lennard. So thanks for sharing these poems. Really interesting directions you can take them. And you can sort of hone on what could be turned up a little bit too. So thanks for sharing these. I hope you enjoyed that, and that's going to be the critique of the week for this week. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. It's just a lot of fun to break up my afternoon and do this, so I appreciate it. Let's see. So this week on the Rattlecast is going to be George David Clark. George David Clark is the author or the editor of 32 Poems, which is, to be honest, I think maybe my favorite all poetry print journal besides Rattle. I love 32 Poems. I think they try to make the poems, short too. So there's exactly 32 poems in every issue. They're 1 page each. So less than 32 lines they might have said at some point and still do. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But it's a nice little chapbook-sized journal that just publishes really excellent poems. He's also the author of Newly Not Eternal, his second book of poetry. And this one it deals with some sensitive content. Son, I think it was, who died in childbirth, profoundly dealing with that loss, and then the twin who survived as well, and that whole complicated thing that was going on. But a really powerful book. I was reading it last night, and he's a formal leaning poet too, so there's a lot of formality. One of the central poem in the book is a really interesting hero or crown of sonnets. So interesting book there, Newly Not Eternal, from George David Clark, just released. Rattlecast number 231. The prompt for this week was to I gotta look up to get the phrasing right, even though I remember it was write a poem. Where did it go? Write a poem. I'm getting there. Don't worry. Write a poem entitled "A Brief History of X," where X is a word that needs to be translated, and the poem is less than a page. So a brief history of something, and that something should be a word that needs a translation. And that's sort of a nod both to last week's guest, Rimas Uzgaris being a translator of Lithuanian poets, and also his poem A Brief History of wasn't Lithuania, it was Vilnius. Yeah, Brief History of Vilnius. Anyway, that is going to be your Rattlecast episode number 231 with George David Clark, Monday, February 5th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.